Good afternoon, everyone. You guys sound really, really tired. I'm gonna need you to get a little more energy. Good afternoon, everybody. Much, much better. My allergies are kicking in and the whole 9 yards. So I need you to be enthusiastic. These drugs won't put me to sleep. You are here with us today to talk about exploring family histories. My name is Johnette Gordon-Weaver. I am going to be your moderator. I am a native of Williamsburg, Virginia, and I am discovering even more and more about my family history. My journey began in 2017 when the riots at Charlottesville were taking place. I thought I needed to know more about who I am, where I come from, and how that matters and fits into the scheme of things. Because Williamsburg and Charlottesville are a lot alike. You know, we're both college towns. They're both towns that are fairly affluent. And they're both towns where you have a large number of haves and an even large number of have-nots. So that started me on that journey. But enough about me. We are going to hear from a couple of speakers today. The first one will be Nikia Smith, the author of We Weren't Taught How to Smile, and she's going to be doing this virtually. Nikia is a host, a consultant, and a documentarian with more than 20 years of experience as a genealogist. She has an extensive experience in researching the enslaved and their communities, and she's an expert in genealogy along the Mississippi Delta. Nikia has diverse and varied experience with the media, with a background in audio, video, and written communications. She's appeared on the Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN, MSNBC, and I did not say Fox. She is an Emmy-winning episode. She is part of an Emmy-winning episode of the series, Who Do You Think You Are? And was featured in the groundbreaking short film, A Dream Delivered, The Lost Letters of Hawkins Wilson. She's been interviewed by the National Geographic, Time, and USA Today, as well as the New York Times. And she's the host of Black Pro-Gen Live, an innovative web show with more than 130 episodes focused on people of color, genealogy, and family history. Welcome, if you will, virtually, Nikia Smith.
Hi, everyone, tuning in here live from Memphis. So I'm way far away, but I have a lot to share in my short period of time. I believe this is the first time I have shared this information in this way publicly, so consider yourselves blessed to be among the folks who are going to hear it. These are stories and things that I have encountered or that I've learned about through the course of my life that I grew up hearing, that you probably are probably going to think are just crazy when you hear them all together, and the fact that they came from the same family. But one of the things that I've learned as a part of the process of being a family historian is that there are certain aspects of our personalities that are nature, and there's other parts that are nurtured. And this particular part is totally nature. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Where this story begins, or at least is early, one of the earliest ways that we can start talking about it is with a will. And I've gone across a number of wills that record enslaved people, but this one in particular, I've never seen one like it since I came across it. And it took me more than 20 years to get to it. It started with one of my first cousins going through archives, literally doing the manual search of genealogy, which we tend to go back to now when we don't have any options online, and him asking questions of our elders around who our slaveholder was and where our surname came from. And I picked up the mantle from him. And as a result of records access, I was able to get to a record in the Freedmen's Bureau that connected my ancestors to a particular place where we were documented in Northeast Louisiana about a year or so before freedom came down. And as a result of finding one of my ancestors in this place, I uncovered a will that begins like this. It's dated September 29th of 1861, and it says, being attacked with a hemorrhage this morning, which may be from the lungs, I think it best to make my will at the same time and day that there being no white person on the place, I do not wish suspicion to rest on any of my Negroes, as some persons may think I died by the hands of violence. Not so. My Negroes would defend me to the last. This ends up being the will of the last slaveholder of my third and second great grandparents, people that I searched for as enslaved people for more than 20 years. And in the process of this slaveholder who's realizing that he is in the midst of the Civil War and that things are in chaos in this area in North Louisiana, where eventually the federal troops come, including Ulysses S. Grant, he wants it to be known that his condition wasn't caused by his enslaved people. This man was a lawyer, and he was extremely smart, and he was arguing against secession. He thought it was stupid. And you're hearing me say this, and I'm talking about a slaveholder who, in the later paragraphs, names my third great grandparents that he wants them to be sold away if the debts of his estate exceed what the cash they have on hand. And that was not a mistake, because those were the most valuable assets he had, were my ancestors. And this lawyer was progressive. He continues to challenge my mind about how I think about slaveholders, because he's going throughout Mississippi and Louisiana making these speeches and saying things like, quote, "The Native American Party is an organization of Whigs to prescribe foreign-born citizens whose only crime consists of voting the Democratic ticket, that when they become naturalized." He was arguing for the fact that our country shouldn't be anti-immigrant. He argued this in the 1840s, but he's a slaveholder. And not only was he just any slaveholder, the enslaved, which included my ancestors, were passed down to him by his mother-in-law, who just so happened to be the niece of President Andrew Jackson. And we know his history. And so what I like to believe is that Hugh Short, this slaveholder, who was a lawyer, who argued against secession, who that people believe that he argued himself to death against secession, that my ancestors picked up something from this man. Because you don't have who we end this presentation with unless you have some incredibly smart and adept and magnificent individuals who were denied the ability to read and write. But once they got the opportunity to enact their personhood, they did incredible things. So what happens is that my third great grandfather, King Atlas, and that is literally his name, it's like the Greek god. And I find that no coincidence, because there are no Atlas slaveholders. They chose their surname. He's noted in the newspaper as being somebody who can grow pretty much anything that he puts his hands to. Him and his children emerged from the system of enslavement with the equivalent of $42,000 worth of personal and real estate, likely because they had skilled trades like being a blacksmith, being a veterinarian, being an agrarian. But all of that could have come tumbling down one day. See, on March 16th, 1889, King Atlas Sr. was in a general store in Lake Providence, Louisiana. And when he was in this general store, he gets into a dispute with two white men at the back of the store. And we still don't know what happened, but one of these white men hit him. And you would think that he would be lynched, because this is 1889, right? Reconstruction is over. The federal troops have left. There's no protection for Black folks anymore. But he didn't die. He wasn't lynched. In fact, the town fined the two white men, not him. So I like to think that in this scenario, what he learned was that, yes, I can defend myself, but also I have a right and a privilege to challenge based on the law, based on my personhood, and based on my citizenship. And what happens as a result of this scenario is that his descendants, which include his grandson, his grandson ends up being a guide for President Roosevelt on a bear hunt. If anyone here is listening, if you have a teddy bear in your house, it's because of this bear hunt that took place in 1907. Teddy bears didn't exist before that. They were created because Teddy went on a bear hunt on the Mississippi Delta. And when you read the accounts, they only talk about one Black man. You can see him way in the back named Holt Collier. But my family history, what people in my family said was that, no, your great-grandfather was on that bear hunt. And I searched and I searched and I searched to find this proximity. I knew the relationship that my great-grandfather had with the US Senator, Senator Joseph Ransdell, who was close personal friends with Teddy Roosevelt. And I knew that that's how he got on this bear hunt, but I couldn't find any newspaper articles that mentioned it until I found out that the president wrote an account of his bear hunt, that he limited the amount of media who was there so no one would get shot. And that in his account in a magazine, he included extra pictures, which included the Negro guides, which at center is my great-grandfather.
Wow.
And so what happens after this? Well, this person you're looking at, see, he's the only one in 9 generations who was not able to vote. Everyone else had the ability to do so, even his grandfather and his father. But him, despite him paying poll taxes and living to be 83 years old, he could not participate in the political process. So again, if we're in a general store and we're supposed to die because of racial violence, but we don't, and we have proximity to these notable people who are making decisions and choices in our lives, well, what happens to that? That means that your great-grandson testifies in front of the US Civil Rights Commission for voting. We get this in 1960, where this man, Reverend Francis Joseph Atlas, my great uncle, he talks about his efforts to try to register to vote for more than 20 years. And he also talks about the fact that he pays taxes and that he wants a voice in the government in which he lives. And he feels that it's his constitutional right. And like it's his responsibility as a citizen to take on whatever share he can that he thinks that he should vote. And within 2 years, the Justice Department came down and they registered the first set of Black voters since Reconstruction in 1962. And he was among them. And that wasn't the end of the story, see, because people think with the movement that once the act happened, that everything was fine. No, this man suffered repercussions for years. It was covered in Jet magazine, where he's advocating for help. He talks about how the Justice Department told him to just get a lawyer, but when they won't give you oil to heat your house, or they will not gin your cotton, how do you make your living? When people in my family are threatened with their lives to just come home, finally, it ended. He was on the successful end of it. He ends up being the first Black person elected to the school board in a rural parish in Louisiana that is still predominantly Black. What else happens? His sister begins to advocate in South Louisiana. See, they're the only two that stay in the state of Louisiana. All the other 11 siblings, out of the other 9, they leave. They go to other places. They're part of the Great Migration. But the only 2 that stayed, they were essentially a part of the Civil Rights Movement. This young lady, my aunt, refused for her children to call white people sir or ma'am. She helped secure federal funds for the redevelopment of the lower 9th Ward after Hurricane Betsy and Camille. What do her children do? Well, her 3 daughters become part of the Civil Rights Movement. All 3 of them are part of the Freedom Rides. They were at the March on Washington. They desegregated the city of New Orleans. If you walk down this Canal Street in New Orleans and you can go into those stores, you can thank those 3 women along with several others from the New Orleans core chapter. And these are great-great-granddaughters of that initial man from that scuffle. And not only just Canal, they even integrated the zoo. And it's not just them. More. Another great-great-granddaughter. What have you ever heard of a singular man having 2 great-grandchildren who testified in front of the Civil Rights Commission about voting? This is Cousin Willie Mae, who is a teacher in Minden, Louisiana, which is not far from where our family is from. She testified about how, despite the fact that she had an undergraduate degree and had credits towards a master's degree, could not successfully pass the test to register to vote, but that individuals who had not graduated from high school who were white could pass the same test. And they disqualified her because she didn't put the ward that she lived in on her card. But that's not it. We end up with someone in the House of Representatives. That's what all this leads to. It's not just the fight in the general store, it's the fact that all of us are walking around as active disruptors now because we know who we are. Now, Cedric is no longer in the House. He is now a senior advisor to the Democratic Party, but he's the third great grandson of the man that starts all of this off. So I say that to say, I share all of this to say, no, we don't have Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, but in each one of our families are individuals who, just by virtue of them surviving as Black folks, have carved out a space for us today that we can use to advocate for people who aren't even thought of right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikia. I'm gonna ask if you will stick around for a little bit in case there are questions immediately thereafter. She told a great story, didn't she? It's wonderful, and she's absolutely right. Each and every one of us has an ancestor or someone from whom we descend who does something. You might think it's small, but in the great scheme of things, every little cog makes that wheel turn, every little cog. I'm gonna brag for just 1 second. I have an ancestor who was a patriot in the Revolutionary War. For 250 years, nobody knew his name. We didn't know anything about him. Didn't figure we're ever gonna know anything about him. Well, yesterday, that patriot, I was told, will now have a spot in the Transportation Museum down at Fort Eustis. My ancestor, Anthony Roberts, served as a wagoner during the Revolutionary War as a free Black man here in Virginia, York County to be exact. And yesterday, a federal museum decided he was worthy. Well, we kind of insisted he was worthy, but they decided that they were going to honor him and give him place in that museum. Might not seem large to anybody else, but the spirit of Sankofa is real. Nobody knew about him. We ran back and got him, and he walks with me today. So y'all might not applaud that, but I think it's everything. We are honored to have as our next presenter, Darien Wigfall, who's going to speak to you about who were the Wigfalls. Darien Wigfall is an author, an activist, arts organizer, DJ, and entrepreneur. He co-directed the Farfetch Music Collective and has worked in most of the St. Louis area arts and education industry, from 9 Network to KDHX Public Media to the Central Public Library and volunteer mentoring. Darien's direct action in the Ferguson uprising, y'all remember Ferguson, right? Say his name. Say his name. There you go. Say his name. Don't let him die like that. Mike Brown. He lived. He was a Black man, and he lived. Anyway, enough of my preaching, right? But he lives in my heart. There are so many names I'm never going to forget. Atatiana Jefferson, Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor. Say their names on a daily basis. Remember that they existed. Darien remembers, and his direct action in the Ferguson uprising led to his protest sign and art being inducted into the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. He's talented, y'all. As well as a feature in Smithsonian Magazine in December 2015. In recognition of his efforts in civil rights and business successes, Darien was featured alongside his collaborative partners in the February 2016 issue of Fortune magazine. All of this combined work brings Wigfall to the forward through Ferguson Racial Healing and Justice Fund Community Governance Board and work with the St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Coalition, as well as a lot of other community works currently. Next voice you hear will be that of Darien Wigfall.
So the song you just heard was in the Gullah Geechee tradition. And my people also come from this tradition. While Bessie Jones, who sang that song, is from Georgia, my people are from South Carolina. And so I bring that culture that connects us directly to the continent of Africa. And I believe that our story for the Lemon Project, for the Wigfall Discovery Project, begins and ends in Africa. And I'm here to present that to you today. So, my name is Darien Wigfall, and most of you don't know me, but by the end of this presentation, I hope that you'll remember my family's last name for the rest of your life. A little bit about me before I start. My personal background is in research science. So I have a degree in biology from a university that also used slave labor for their construction. And then I did 7 years of bench science work in St. Louis at another university that has the same history. And in 2014, during the Ferguson uprising, I actually took a leap of faith out of science into music and media, and that's where I've been kind of working for this decade. And that was until I found the information that I'm about to present to you. And that all came up in December 2022, if you believe that. So before I get started, I just want to ask a few questions. And you can raise your hand or answer in your own head, but if you raise your hand, please hold it up. So how many of us have the history of our family of people being enslaved? And does anybody in here know that their family has history of enslaving people? So if you see the hands that went up, you can see that it pretty much affects us all. I think probably 98% of the hands in the room went up. So how does that make you feel? Are there any significant stories in your family that you would like to see told? And if you do have those, say those for the Q&A portion. But now let me tell you a few of the stories of my family's history and why I'm here today. The reason that I come to this information is my family's past of owning land in South Carolina. And so it's most likely the result of Field Order number 15. And if you are familiar with that, that was an order that General George Tecumseh Sherman gave, I believe that right after the Civil War ended, to give roughly 400,000 acres from South Carolina to Florida to formerly enslaved people. And so I believe that's how we got the land, but that's not exactly how I came to it. So my great-great-great-grandfather, whose name also happens to be Great, Friday Great, I believe he named himself after being enslaved, but it was Grate, obtained a 26.5-acre lot that was highly sought after ever since. He probably got in the early 1800s, or sorry, late 1800s or early 1900s. And it's sandwiched in between Hilton Head to the north and Myrtle Beach to the south. So as you can expect, this kind of coastal land is very highly sought after. And so it's been picked at and falsely sold over the years. He had 26.5 acres to start. It's now about 13.5 acres to end. And so we want to protect this as a family. And so I'm sure as many of you know in here, that heirs property in post-slavery southern states is really hard to navigate. And so in navigating all this, we have found out that the legend that we got it from a slave owner is not necessarily true. So I thought my great-great-grandmother, Mary Ann Wigfall, was enslaved and received it from a slave owner. Turns out that's not true. So, let's see. So this is the record of Friday Great. You can see his name at the top, and then his wife, Herminda, and then down there near the bottom is my great-great-grandmother, Mary Ann. And then this is the deed from South Carolina that led me to find two other deeds. You can see one is underlined in the middle, and that one actually shows where Friday lost his land to delinquent taxes in 1934, and then the sheriff bought it for $19.10. And then his daughter, my great-great-grandmother, Mary Ann, bought it back from the sheriff in 1938 for $56.18. And like I said, it's been picked up and falsely sold over the years, but what we're trying to do now is figure out, number one, did it come from field over number 15 and Freeman's Bureau, and where did this actual land actually come from? But what led me here was a Google search, and what I found when I searched Wigfall Plantation, South Carolina, was this guy. This is the first person I found. Louis T. Wigfall, and I had no clue about this person before December 2022. But it turns out that because of his efforts in the Confederacy, he was a Confederate colonel, and then in his own town in Edgefield, South Carolina, which is not too far from here, he dispersed his own name by dueling people. He actually injured a bunch of different people, even going so far as to like the original social media. He posted a note on a courthouse about a man's grandfather, and the man came to defend his grandfather, and while Lewis was there, he had two guns, right? He's standing in front of the courthouse. And the guy asked him to take it down. He said, I'm not gonna take it down. He said, if you take it down, I'll shoot you. So the guy takes it down and he shot him. So after this type of history, he needed to move, and so he went to Galveston, Texas. And from there, he still worked with the Confederacy, but he became a Texas state senator and a U.S. senator from the state of Texas. And so this is actually a cartoon that somebody drew of him trying to negotiate the end of the Civil War on his own. He took a Confederate boat with a few men and sailed out to Fort Sumter. And while they were firing on Fort Sumter, tried to negotiate them to put the white flag up. So that was the first person I found, just searching the plantation. So the next thing I found was this blog. And so this stands out to me because of the story that's here about August. And it is basically the theme from Lion King, right? So this young man was the next in line to be king in his tribe, and then was tricked by a jealous uncle and sold to slave traders. And so here, the person that wrote about it is John Baker, who's also a descendant of August. And he and the other Africans also suffered under slavery, but that story of him being in line to be royalty is one that I think a lot of us have, and that, you know, is one of the quintessential stories that's told about or talked about when we talk about people being enslaved. Now, the blog is mostly about a man named John Wigfall, who enslaved August to begin with. But because he was a British loyalist, he was the first generation in the U.S. from England. So his father, Samuel Wigfall, which is also my father's name, his father, Samuel Wigfall, was born in 1702. My father was born in 1946. Same name, totally different histories, but it all stems from the same area in South Carolina and the plantations they own. So John Wigfall was a British loyalist because his father was from England, so were his uncles and other people. And so he pulled double duty during the Revolutionary War. he actually fought for the British and for the colonies. And so as the state of South Carolina was being formed, they decided that because he did that, some of his property should be taken as British property and given to the new state. It was called the Council of Johnstown. And so it turns out that John Wigfall was a captain in the Revolutionary War. And he was meant to be exiled, and the enslaved people that were split between Tower Hill Plantation, which was owned by the nephew of Colonel Michael Blow, Richard Blow, which is not far from here in Sussex County, Virginia. Colonel Benjamin Baker of Mainstream County, Captain Sinclair of Smithfield, Virginia, and William Hines of Southampton, Virginia. And I even have letters begging to reinstate John. So this is the article that actually showed his property being confiscated. It was a paper called the Royal Gazette. And at the top, you can see January 1782. That's when the decision was made to confiscate all of these people's property. You can see that there's a bunch of people on here. And then, let's see, right here, you find John right there. And so this was in a category called Class 5, and this was those who formed commissions of civil or military under the British government since conquest of the province. And so, and then I included this last one because I just like the Class 6 obnoxious persons, so it was interesting to me. So I guess these people were, espousing the British winning, and then when they lost some property. And so there were people that wrote letters to keep John in the colony, and it's actually signed by all these different people. He was like a person that appraised slaves, would appraise property. I believe his cousin was one of the first people to start schools in Charleston, South Carolina as well. So these people were higher up in the society. And presently, I'm finding out information like Samuel Wigfall, who was born in 1702, was a captain in the British arms. And his father, Samuel, who was born in the mid-1600s, was the captain of the Scottish arms. So the fact that all of these captains, and then the colonel that I talked about, Lewis, are all in the same family means that this family had a lot of means, right? Not only that, but John Wigfall married the granddaughter of Richard Ashby, and this shows a record of Richard Ashby sending his son John, who was Constantia's father, to the U.S. to help start efforts for the Royal African Company. And so if you know about that, that was the biggest British slave enterprise from about 1650 to 1780. And then this is actually a record of the boat that John was on, which was called the Martha. And so John Ashby's daughter, let's see, Constantia married John Wigfall. And so, in my opinion, they're trying to consolidate power. And, as the elite folks tend to do, they try to, marry other families. Well, these people have this property, so maybe we should, be with them, or these people have access to this crop or whatever. So, they had so many means. They had a coat of arms. So this comes from Scotland, and that's where the name originates from. The Wigfall name originated around the 13th century. And so this coat of arms comes from the family on that side. And I actually plan to visit Europe later this year with my friend Johnette for the year, because we're shooting a documentary to cover all this. And, for what it's worth, most of what I'm finding is stories about white folks. And so what I'm really trying to do is find more stories like August and the Black folks, but it's really hard to do. So I believe going to England to the National Archives there will give me some of the records of the Royal African Company and some of their shipments and things like that. And there's so much that I could tell you, but I couldn't possibly fit it all in. But I will say that August, Phyllis, Limbrick, Jenny, Flora, and Nanny were sent to a family that also enslaved Dred Scott. So earlier you heard me talk about Richard Blow. Richard Blow is the cousin of Peter Blow, who enslaved Dred Scott. And it all happened in an area that Nat Turner was in operation. So my ancestor August actually died the year after the rebellion. I believe the rebellion was 1831 and August died in 1832. So during that time, Dred Scott lived in Southampton and was raised to about 18, and then Peter moved to Alabama, and then from Alabama to St. Louis, which is where I'm from. Peter had a son named Henry, who was anti-slavery. So he and his brother Taylor ended up paying for Dred Scott's legal defense. So not only did they do that, they were prominent figures in St. Louis. And they actually, I didn't know this before I started working there, started the Episcopal church that I worked for. So I'm the executive director of the Episcopal church named St. Paul's. And there are like historic markers all around our campus. And I honestly was just having someone come in and look at the HVAC system. And because he asked our pastor about a stone block in the front yard that said southeast corner of Common Ground, she told him the story of the Blow starting his church. And so come to find out they started that church, there's a school down the street, and they own a bunch of property right around where I typically just walk around. We help a lot of unhoused people. So, you know, the places that I'm walking around were the places that the folks that got enslaved people from the Wigfalls also operated. And so one of the thing that really strikes me is like the Wigfalls, do they still have this wealth? Where is it? How do we put at least some of it, if not the majority of it, in the hands of the people, of the descendants who actually did the labor to build that wealth? That family owned roughly 10,000 acres collectively across their multiple plantations. So I'm wondering who owns it now? You know, who was it sold for profit? These are the questions in my mind. And the main thing I want to figure out is how my family's stories can be a catalyst and example for other Americans to do the same type of research. How do we use these lessons to not repeat these atrocities? I just traveled to Senegal and Gambia, which is where I got this outfit and this necklace, to try to connect with the cultures from which I stem. And I also plan to go to England to see where the Wigfalls come from. As you can see, Northwestern Europeans down there at the bottom. And that French and German piece is a piece of it, but it's mostly British blood. So this is the list of the places that I'll go on a journey to discover my roots before we came in contact with the Wigfalls. And I hope you'll follow my journey. And I thank you for listening. Thank you for your time.
Beautiful story now. Beautiful story, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did he keep you guys engaged? Me too. That discovery to find your roots, to find where you come from, it burns deep within inside. I raised my hand when they said, do you come from enslaved people? I also raised my hand when he said, do you come from enslavers? That same great grandfather who I'm proud of, he owned a slave. I know at least one, he didn't pay taxes on him. We found that out in the courts in York County. And we're thinking that it probably was a family member to keep them from being sold. But due to genealogists, like those who are here, people like Darien who are on searches, like Nikia, we can find out more and more. It feels like a difficult task. It feels like something that can't be proven. But if you keep searching and you keep digging, there's a lot of truth in oral history. Just because something is passed down verbally doesn't mean that it's not true. You can find ways of doing things. Darien, good luck with finding that wealth from the Wigfall family. I descend on one side of my family from a family called the Winders. They were the ones I was actually gonna apply to try to be a member of the DAR with. And if y'all wondering why I'm talking to myself, 2 of our panelists aren't here. So I'm killing just a little bit of time. And I'm gonna give them, Darien and Nikia, an opportunity to take their questions. But as filler, I saw the Winder name. I know that the Winders in the 1700s were governors in the state of Maryland. I know they owned a plantation, and I knew that they were members of the DAR. And I thought, haha, this will be an easy in, because I took a DNA test, and lo and behold, I was related to one by blood. And I contacted her. And immediately she removed all her information. And nothing was left on Ancestry whatsoever. There's a fear that we're gonna come and say, hey, you better give me what you owe me because you owned my people. That's a big old fear. I'm not necessarily that person. I could be. I mean, it depends on what kind of wealth we're talking about. If it's really old money, I might go after it. But there's the fear about those reparations. I'm not the only person who's had that happen. When you discover that you're a match DNA with somebody and you look for that wealth, some folk might try to hide it from you and deny what's going on. That's the end of my dissertation. If any of you have any questions for either Nikia or Darien, now is your opportunity to ask them. Yes.
I don't have a question. I have I guess a ramble, and it's from Darien. Darien, I was delighted to hear that there's another Episcopalian in the room. I am part of our Becoming Beloved community, Sacred Ground community. For those of you who aren't Episcopalians, the Episcopal Church, capital E, capital C, has a big racial justice movement. Probably because we had a presiding bishop that was a man of color, Michael Curry. And my church, Grace Episcopal, also in Yorktown, everybody looks like me. Nobody is really excited about our racial justice program, but our church, built in the 1600s, was built by enslaved people, and a lot of our rectors had slaves. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's interesting because I'm actually applying for a Building Beloved community grant right now to help me with the project. So.
Okay, I'm from Washington, D.C., where I have been a longtime member of the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. So I have a combination question and comment for Darien mainly. I was so glad to hear you talk about your ancestors who had owned land in South Carolina, and that you still have some of it, because not enough of those stories are told. And so I appreciate that. But also, there's a woman who's going to be presenting at this conference, not about this specific topic, Bernice Bennett, who's written a book titled Black Homesteaders of the South. So it's about a later time period, more like late 1800s, not immediately after the Civil War, and early 2000s, but you might want to check her out. Although she's not going to be talking about that book today, but you can make a note of the book. And so your story certainly can be a catalyst for others, as you said you hoped it would be. I've been on a mission to research my ancestors. One of them was enslaved down the road at Appomattox. And I didn't know that when I was growing up. I learned it in about 2006 when my husband and I had the responsibility to clean that house for an elderly relative. Short story, almost as soon as I heard about that connection to Appomattox, I visited the National Park site at Appomattox. And I've been talking to the park historian and so many others for years about recognizing my ancestor who was enslaved there. And just this year, they had put up a sign honoring and recognizing her. So everything takes time. So, your story and maybe my story can be a catalyst for others to tell theirs too.
You try to climb over that. That's amazing. And it really is about recognition. We're pulling out stories that would otherwise be lost.
Another question. Have you connected with Lynn Jackson, descendant of Dred Scott?
No, but that's a good Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
she's written,
And,
do you know who I'm talking about?
yeah, she's pretty famous for, going around, kind of speaking about.
Yeah.
That's
She
kind of,
spoke at Roots Tech last month. Or was it this month? Well, end of February, early March. So I was with her for there. Yeah.
I don't know, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, I honestly just found that out about a month ago.
So there's and I don't know any history of it, but there's one of the buildings here at Glow Hall, right? There's a connection to that. You might want to check into that, see the spelling, if there's any connection for that. There might be a lead.
A lot of the records that I got, the one of August that I actually found that places him in the United States is from College of William and Mary, their archives. And some people that, Carolyn Wilson, I think is her name, has been sending me records and things like that. So she actually has helped me locate the Blow estate as well. So I'm gonna check that out while I'm out here.
Probably can get you
Yes, please.
directed.
I'll probably connect with you or her after this too.
I want to ask the Senator in Louisiana, what motivated? Yeah, because they can hear you on Zoom.
I can hear you.
What motivated your family to stay in the coffin when everybody else ran north?
Well, you know what? It's interesting. My grandmother was the youngest of 11, and 9 of them got to adulthood. And as a result of the oldest being in World War I and having exposure to different environment, several of them going to Tuskegee, folks were leaving the nest, and they ended up in a multitude of cities. And it just so happened that the only 2 who stayed in the state of Louisiana ended up getting caught up in the civil rights movement. And so I think the pull for them, in particular with my uncle, was the fact that we owned our land, and the fact that we would be leaving behind a very valuable asset had we left. So even though those siblings were in Detroit and Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, they were spread out all over the place. That family homestead remained there, and then my uncle's land was on the same road. It's still in the family, so that was the pull, was we didn't want to leave behind our most valuable asset that we had. And it was very treacherous for years. Again, that's one of the aspects of the movement that I don't think a lot of people process or think about. There's an incredible book that was released last year called The Movement Made Us, that was written by by David Dennis Jr. And his father was in Corps with my cousins. And one of the things that I think he talks about so well is the after effects of being involved in things like this. Folks think that the day that the integration happened, it was over, that folks didn't have to go back and continue to test and keep the environment integrated. So the folks who thought they couldn't come would go, and the people who didn't want you there would realize you weren't leaving. And in some ways, there is an emotional and psychological aspect that also goes along with that as well. So I would say the major motivation was our land and not leaving that behind, and recognizing that we had been rooted there since the 1840s. And that's what kept them there. In fact, we still have family that lives there. They never left.
I'm Bill Cody. I work a lot in the archives, so I'm very curious. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're hoping to find? Because that might be helpful.
Yes. I was just at the National Archives yesterday looking at records. It looks like they might be in South Carolina, but really I'm trying to find a record of how Friday Great got. And I can't find, so the records that I'm finding are, even of the slave census, they only list the slave owner. And they list like age and.
Very important note. I mentioned one.
Oh.
Were you moved there?
Yes, yes. Yes, so yeah, Royal African Company records. I'm looking for ship records to see, we believe that August and Bina and a couple of my ancestors come from Sierra Leone. And so I want to see what records they have of going there and picking up people and things like that around the 1760s. So
Those would be shipwise manifests. That time prior to the importation ban in 1808. There are some that are available, but they're scant. Usually where you can kind of time when shiploads would come is they would advertise when they were bringing enslaved people from specific places. So you can look in the newspaper because they would run an ad until they sold everyone off the ship. You can also check for importation into places like Virginia or like Charleston. Family Search has a database of records where people are transacting enslaved folks. And the differentiator you're looking for is you're not looking for them to be referred to as Negroes. They're specifically going to be referred to as Africans. There's a difference.
Oh, I appreciate that. All right. Any other questions for me or Dee?
You can give it back to me. I'm on the spot, y'all. I first need to apologize to Nicka. I've been mispronouncing your name. And nothing bothers me more than having my name mispronounced. So I apologize. Thank you for that tidbit of information. African. I now know where to go on another search. Does anybody, okay.
Well, I seem to be questions maybe in the chat and then someone can answer.
We're monitoring that.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I thought maybe somebody had a question. Sorry.
Thank you.
Hand raised though.
Do you see a hand raised?
Interactive with them. Oh, okay.
Meanwhile, does anybody else present have a story, an anecdote, or a question you would like to share? Are you ready?
She's actually one of the panelists. Who's supposed to-
Oh, okay.
We have one at the council, but she's supposed to-
She's gonna do it via Zoom. Perfect. We have another expert to hear from.
Do you prefer to share your PowerPoint or would you like me to advance the slides for you? Could you hear me? Would you like me to put your PowerPoint up and advance the slides for you, or would you prefer to share your screen?
She might not hear you.
Can you hear us? LaTika?
Yes, yes.
Would
This is
you-
LaTika. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, would you like me to put your PowerPoint up and advance the slides, or would you like to share your screen and do it on your end?
Yes, you can put the PowerPoint up and advance the slides.
Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is LaTika Lee, and I want to tell you about my Gullah Geechee heritage. And I would like to give you an experience through the 55th annual Aiken-Singleton Family Reunion. First, I have a question for you. Who's heard of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina? Practically everyone, right? Well, when you visit Hilton Head Island, which is one of the top vacation spots in America and across the globe, one of the things that you may not know about, or one of the people that you may not know about, is the Gullah Geechee, and that is my heritage. So I want to talk to you about that background today. You can go to the next slide, please. So the Aiken-Singleton Family Reunion has been taking place for more than 55 years, and it started in the 1960s. Here in this slide is a gathering of some of our family members go back to the next one, please. A gathering of our family members for a local magazine, Hilton Head Island magazine. So today I'll talk to you about the Gullah Geechee, South Carolina, the Palmetto State, as well as share some genealogical resources for you, and other research methods to tracing your roots. You can go to the next slide. Did you know that much of the African American population in America can trace their ancestry back to the Sea Islands of South Carolina and the Southern United States? So from North Carolina, Wilmington, this is a map from the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. So the corridor begins in North Carolina, and it goes to Jacksonville, Florida, and about 30 miles inward. So there are lots of isolated islands, barrier islands, physical places along the southern United States border. And so that's the area that we're talking about, where most of us can trace our roots. The most widely used record in genealogy research is the US Census, but it did not record all African Americans by name until 1870, which was the first census after the war, after the Civil War. Thus leaving a gaping hole in the written archives. But thankfully, secondary sources, the oral tradition, and other ways of preserving our heritage have been preserved through stories, places of memory, historic sites, and other events. Next slide. So these are some members of the Singleton family. And we host our annual event, well, annually. Next event, next slide, please. So during the family reunion time, it's a lot of excitement. People are coming from all across America, from Los Angeles to Atlanta to New York. This particular year, the family is visiting Savannah, Georgia, which is my hometown. If you had not detected that accent, I still have my accent, although I lived in Virginia for 30 years. This is us visiting River Street, which is a popular street in Savannah, Georgia, just on the coast between South Carolina and Georgia. Next slide, please. So the 55th annual Aiken-Singleton Family Reunion is held the third weekend in June on Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. It is held on family land called Aiken Place. And so we have about 250 to 300 people coming each year to celebrate family. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the Aiken-Singleton family is among the first generations of Gullah people on Hilton Head Island who continue to preserve Gullah language, customs, arts, and cuisine. The family reunion was started in the early 1960s after the death of the family matriarch, Maybelle Singleton Aiken. And she was my grandfather's first cousin. So after she passed away, the Aiken side of the family decided to have a get-together on Father's Day. So that's why it's held the third weekend in June. Everyone was asked to bring a covered dish, and the dinner was such a success that it became an annual event. Next slide, please. During the event, we talk about our past history with military service on the island through Mitchellville, in the town of Mitchellville. We talk about our participation in the Civil War and pre-Civil War, of course. And as you all know, African Americans have participated in all conflicts or wars that support the United States. So we talk about our past throughout the family reunion. We arrive on Friday evening with a meet and greet. On Saturday, there is usually an event for children. We may go to a museum. We may do a tour, such as here on the right with the Gullah Tours, which is operated by our neighbors. We're almost kin to everybody on the island, so it's pretty tough. But one of our neighbors is the Campbells, and the Campbells run this particular tour. You can go to the next slide. So in educating our family, we talk about the United States Census and where we fall during, it depends on the year. This particular record is from 1940, and it's from the Fusky Island, because we have folks who are scattered throughout the small isolated islands that I mentioned before. Some folks are on the Fusky, some people are on Pinckney. You might have heard of St. Helena Island, St. John's Island. These are some of the islands that are around Hilton Head Island, as well as some of the sea towns that are close by. One of them being the county seat known as Beaufort. It's the city of Beaufort. There is the town of Bluffton, and where I grew up in the city, Savannah. So these are places that are connected to Hilton Head Island, but Hilton Head Island did not have a bridge. And so some of these other places did not have a bridge, and to this day still do not have a bridge with everyday access. One of those places being the Fusky Island. And so since I'm mentioning the Fusky Island, you can go to the next slide, please. This is on your, let's see, left, is Mr. Emery Shaw Campbell. Some of you may have heard of him. He is a cultural historian, and he has given tours. He's known for his work in cultural preservation at the Penn School, Penn Center. And he's talking here with some Aiken and Singleton, they're Aikens actually, Aiken family members about restoration on the beach, for Singleton Beach. And I believe this was in the mid 2000s. So this was around 2006. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, we gather for the Aiken Singleton family reunion. I am on the Singleton side, which is the smaller side. On the Aiken side of the family, there were 12 brothers and sisters, versus on my side of the family, there were only 2. So I don't know how we ended up on the short end of the stick, but here we are in the that was the mid 2000s, visiting Singleton Beach, and as well as, let's see, on the home place being Aiken Place. So we have casual events that involve intergenerational experiences for children as well as the elders. Next slide, please. These are some mentions of the family in the local newspaper, including the Savannah Morning News, the Island Packet, and other local newspapers recognizing the family reunion over the years. You can go to the next slide, please. So here we are. These are some activities that take place at the family reunion. family games, singing, as well as just taking photos with multiple generations. So in the picture to the right, there is 1, 2, 3 generations. Next slide, please. In these photos, let's see, we have the elders, we have news and games under the big oak tree, which is where we gather for food, for fun. Everything takes place under the tent. So it'll start out with prayer, recognizing elders, recognizing who's traveled the farthest, to later on in the night when it's more adult activities. We're going to the next slide, please. I think there are just a couple more slides. We also gather at the home place for biking, as well as a walk around the home place to honor our ancestors, in addition to supporting our local businesses. So there are several people who have produce businesses, as well as anything that you can think of. So they start with produce. The produce used to be sold when you enter the island, but changes with policies through the island. So there's politics involved too, that some of the persons had to leave the spaces where they were selling as entrepreneurs. You can go to the next slide. So as the popularity of going to Hilton Head Island for vacation increased, there were names attached with some of the visitors who came. The local islanders are called Binyas. So that means they have been here. That's a Gullah term, Binya. And another Gullah term is Kamya. So Binya and Kamya. And you might hear Sister Queen Quet talk about this in her keynote address tomorrow. But some of the names that you may know include Simmons, Burks, Campbells, Browns, Mitchells, and Jones. You can go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, go back one more. That's the last one. Sorry. This slide is a slide of from one of the family members who she wrote some lyrics to a song for the family, and it's based on Battle Hymn of the Republic. So that's what the tune is to the right, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. I'm not going to sing that for you today. My voice is working with me that well, but she talks about family members, including her parents and grandparents, William and Maybelle Aiken, as well as sitting underneath the old oak tree, which you got a glimpse of at the home place, and talks about the land. So the land is very important. It's always been important, and it is important to the Aiken-Singleton family reunion. Next slide, please. And the last slide is the last slide is a few resources for further research, for finding your roots. One of them being the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Organization, the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, the Heritage Library on Hilton Head Island, and the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you very much for your time.
So we are about 3 minutes from the time we're supposed to close. If you have a really short question or a really short remark, you are welcome to make it. Yes, sir.
Just real quick. I got drafted in 65, and when the Geechees came in, we couldn't understand a word. Was that on purpose?
LaTika, I think that's for you.
I couldn't hear the entire comment, but yes, so Gullah is more than one thing. It's the language, it's the food, it's the art and music. And when I grew up in Georgia, which was in the late 70s, early 80s, we still could not understand each other, some of us. But it was looked down upon to speak the language. So like when I was in school, I could not speak Gullah. But of course, my grandmother and her generation, they spoke it all the time. So that was their first language. And I'm sorry if you can, I don't have to move my head. Uh, if you can see my image on the screen, we're on the Fusky Island, which is where my grandmother grew up. And so that's what they spoke. But it was not supported in school. You had to learn the King's English.
Well, thank you so much for that answer. And I thank each and every one of you for your attendance. And I want to remind you, just as a plug for the Lemon Project, Dr. Johnson does a wonderful genealogical workshop once a month. Be looking for those. I attend them on a regular basis. People across the country do. And there are several people in this room who have been instrumental in helping me on my journey, and I know they can help you on yours. Thank you for your time and your attention.